I'm really disappointed that we're going back to a situation where education's not going to be improved for them.
The Ontario college strike has ended and students are going back to class while the teachers' fight still isn't over. Ontario college students are returning to class tomorrow. Queen's Park passed back-to-work legislation ending the month-long strike. Our Marianne Dimain is outside George Brown College with more on the story. Marianne.
Good morning, Carolyn. Yeah, students returning tomorrow, and then later this morning, we're going to see something we haven't seen in 5 weeks, and that's unionized faculty workers reporting to work. And that is because of the back to work legislation that was hammered out over the weekend, which means the striking workers, 12,000 of them from 24 colleges across the province, are now back on the job, forced back to work without a contract, but back on the job nonetheless. But it's going to be a busy time for not only them, but also for the students. They're happy to be back in class, but it's going to be quite a catch-up time for them and their teachers, trying to figure out how to cram an entire semester in just a few weeks. The province says classes will go until December 22nd. Reading week, their winter break next year, will be canceled. That's in 2018. And then at the back end of the spring year, it is going to be extended by probably about 2 weeks or so, just so they don't lose their school year. But it's not all black and white for all students. Of course, there are those who have work placements. They're wondering what this means for them now that the strike is over and they missed some opportunities as a result of class being canceled. All of those questions still need to be answered, as well as what that means for tuition. A lot of students were protesting during the strike. We remember calling on the province to refund that money for classes that they paid for but were not able to attend. So the province says there are plans to return some money for students, but details on that to be determined. Of course, this is far from over. The striking workers who are now back on the job today still don't have a contract, working out things like academic freedom. So they're now going to mediation arbitration. So it's to be continued on that front as well. But as far as everything being back to normal here for students, that's good news for them. A big adjustment, though, when they head back to class tomorrow, Carolyn. I'll send it back to you.
Sure. All right, thank you, Marianne. Now, education will be a hot topic at a town hall with Premier Kathleen Wynne tonight. People are invited to the event at the concert hall, formerly the Masonic Temple on Yonge Street, north of Davenport. Admission is free and open to everyone. Topics will include the minimum wage hike, job security, healthcare, and housing. Seating will be available on a first-come, first-served basis, and doors will open at 5:30. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the morning show. Ontario college students are returning to class tomorrow. Queen's Park passed back-to-work legislation ending the month-long strike. Our Marianne Dimain is outside George Brown College with the very latest. Marianne.
Good morning, Carolyn. It's been 5 weeks on the picket lines, and now this morning, 12,000 unionized college workers will be returning back to the job after that strike began in mid-October. It's good news for students because they've been out of class since this strike began. They, for a long time, had been wondering what this meant for their semester. For the unionized workers, though, including their teachers, this is not necessarily a good outcome for them. They were forced back to work through back-to-work legislation that was hammered out over the weekend, which means they're back to work without a contract. And they say they still haven't dealt with the issue of academic freedom, something they say would improve the education system for the students who are now heading back to class tomorrow. This is what some professors as well as the NDP had to say yesterday.
I'm really disappointed that we're going back to a situation where education's not going to be improved for them. We didn't go out for more money. We went out to improve education in Ontario, and that hasn't happened.
Our college system is still broken. That means that we have 70% of our college faculty are working part-time, precarious, contract work. That's not good enough, not only for them, but for the quality of education that our students are getting.
And it's 500,000 college students who have been out of the class since this strike began in mid-October. They'll be back tomorrow, now forced to catch up and cram a semester's worth of learning in just a matter of weeks. Their classes will now go until about December 22nd. They will not have their winter reading week anymore. That's now canceled so they can catch up on their studies. And the back end of the school year will likely be extended by 1 or 2 weeks. So it's going to be a catch up for them. And then there's other questions about work placements that were affected because of the strike, as well as what this means for the tuition. The money they paid for classes they did not get to attend. All of those questions still need to be answered in the coming days. But for the workers here, they are back in class, but again, it's not over for them. They now enter mediation arbitration. Carolyn, I'll send it back to you.
All right, thank you, Marianne. Ontario college students are returning to class tomorrow. Queen's Park passed back-to-work legislation ending the month-long strike. Our Marianne Dimain is outside George Brown College with more on the story. Marianne.
Carolyn, we're going to see something we haven't seen in 5 weeks, and that is about 12,000 unionized college workers back on the job. They are being forced back without a contract after back-to-work legislation was hammered out over the weekend, which means they'll be here preparing for students to return tomorrow. That's when students will finally be back in class. They've been out since this strike began in mid-October. Classes were canceled, basically leaving 500,000 college students stuck in the middle with nothing to do. Now they'll be returning to class, trying to cram in an entire semester of studies into just a few weeks. We know that the semester will now go until about December 22nd, or rather into December 22nd. They will lose their winter reading week, and then there will be about a week or two added to the back end of the school year into the spring, so that they can salvage what's left of their year and try not to have a big impact on these students. Yesterday, the Minister of Advanced Education spoke out, addressing the calls from students for the province to return some of the money that they spent on tuition for classes they didn't get to attend.
We have directed the colleges to set aside the net savings from the strike, as they have not been paying faculty through the strike, and we will very soon be able to talk about how that money will be dispersed. It will be returned to students and those who are facing the greatest financial needs.
As for the faculty, they are back on the job today, but this is far from over for them. They still don't have a contract, so both sides are now in mediation arbitration. Carolyn, I'll send it back to you.
All right, thank you, Marianne. Morning, everyone. Welcome to the morning show. Ontario college students are returning to class tomorrow. Queen's Park passed back-to-work legislation ending the month-long strike. Marianne Dimain is outside George Brown College with more on the story. Marianne.
Good morning, Carolyn. For 5 weeks, 12,000 unionized college workers were on the picket lines, but this morning they will be reporting back to work after that back-to-work legislation was passed over the weekend. Students returning tomorrow, meaning the strike is now over. Classes will begin, and now the task is trying to cram an entire semester into just a few weeks, and that is going to be a very difficult task for not only the teachers, but also for the 500,000 college students who have been out of class since this strike began in mid-October. Now, the union has said that this is not necessarily a victory for them. They are being forced back to work without a contract. But if they are to look on the bright side, the president of OPSU said there is a silver lining to all of this.
There's going to be a task force look at the college system, which is a huge win. It took quite a bit to talk the premier and the minister into it, but they see the value of it now, and I do believe they're fully committed.
So at the end of the day, it is about the students, though, and what this means for their school year. They are able to salvage that semester. Classes will go until December 22nd. They will lose their winter reading week, and then they'll have to add about a week or two to the back end of the school year next spring. So that is how they're really trying to get around the strike and keep up with all of the studies. Of course, it's not over for them and for the union. They are now in mediation arbitration. Carolyn, I'll send it back to you.
All right, thank you, Marianne. Ontario college students are returning to class tomorrow. Queen's Park passed back-to-work legislation ending the month-long strike. Marianne Dimain is outside George Brown College with more on the story. Marianne.
Good morning, Carolyn. And George Brown, just one of 12 colleges across the province, or rather 24 colleges across the province, where we saw striking workers on the picket lines for the past 5 weeks. But later this morning, they will be reporting to work since the strike began, the first time since the strike began in the middle of October. And of course, that's great news for students. But now it is going to be quite a challenge to catch up on the semester that they lost during the strike. And they've only got a very small time frame to do it. They will continue classes until December 22nd, and then students will lose their winter reading week, and then the back end of the school year into the spring will probably be extended between a week or two. And then there's questions about what this means about work placements and, of course, tuition that students paid for classes they weren't able to attend. The province says that there is a plan to give some money back to students. That is to be determined. But this is what the Minister of Advanced Education said yesterday about teachers being forced back to class.
This terrible chapter is over. We obviously have a lot of work to do. The parties will go to mediation arbitration. That's what the bill says. But students will be back in the classroom Tuesday. And it could have been Monday, should have been Monday, but they're going in on Tuesday. And we have some work to do to look at why the system failed students.
And 500,000 students were stuck in limbo during this strike. Of course, is not the end of the fight for unionized workers. They are back to work without a contract. As the minister said, they are now in mediation arbitration, and they are still fighting for academic freedom, which they say will improve the education of college students. So to be continued, Carolyn. I'll send it back to you.
All right. Thank you, Marianne.